the report had a number of different groups that it has very clearly criticised. It includes the construction industry and construction firms involved. Do you think the criticism there was fair?
It's difficult to say. I mean, there's three main groups who are sort of apportion blame in the report. There's the government officials and government ministers in the years leading up to the blaze, which set the regulations for the building industry and building safety. There's the product manufacturers, which made the products which are used on the cladding system and the refurbishment of the tower. And there's also the construction and design team, which built that refurbishment. I think all three of those groups share blame. I don't think it would be fair to say that any one of those groups is entirely responsible or more responsible than the others. I think the sort of, the broader picture of the report is that it is part of the fire was kind of the result of a culture in the industry leading up to that disaster in 2017.
Well, that's what I wanted to get at. I mean, the culture in the construction industry. Do you think it is fair to criticise that in the way that it has? And indeed, at times, it suggested some of the actions were deliberate.
Some of the actions were definitely deliberate. I mean, I guess, one of the sort of muddy areas which the inquiry has been trying to delve into is the regulatory environment leading up to the fire. And there was a kind of policy of deregulation in the coalition government under David Cameron, which made amending the building regulations extremely complicated. There was a similar cladding fire, the Lakanal house fire in 2009, which killed six people. And after that fire, there were recommendations for the government to amend building safety regulations to include a warning about the risk of cladding, particularly ACM cladding, which was the type used on Grenfell. But because of this deregulation policy, which the government had in those years, which required officials to remove one regulation for every regulation added, it's called a one-in, one-out policy, which was later strengthened to one-in, three-out policy. Because of that, it made amending the regulations extremely difficult because officials would have to figure out what regulations they were going to remove if they wanted to just add one regulation. So this review, following the Lakanal house fire, was sort of expanded into a wider review of the entire building regulations, which is a process which would take years. So because of that, the industry, the firms, construction product manufacturers were operating in this slightly confusing environment where there was no official regulatory warning about the use of ACM. But beyond that, the inquiry has clearly found that the product manufacturers went to great lengths to ensure that their products were being sold on the market. And the inquiry has also found that those manufacturers knew full well that those products were dangerous if used on high-rise buildings during that time.
And thus, the lack of regulation does not absolve people from responsibility?
I don't think so, no, because there were several fire tests conducted by those manufacturers on those products in the years leading up to the fire, and they clearly showed that those products were not safe for use in high-rise buildings. Some of those tests were also rigged. So Celotex, which is one of the manufacturers which made the insulation products used in the tower, that had actually rigged the fire test used to market their insulation product. Another firm, Arconic, which made the ACM cladding panels, which have been found to be the primary cause of the fire, they had actually been marketing that product based on a test result of a different product. So this isn't just about a confusing regulatory environment. This is about manufacturers deliberately misleading the market in order to sell their products.
On the flip side, looking forward, there's always the risk of an overreaction, though that kind of seems pretty hard to do in light of all of this. That said, moving forward at a time when the country's wanting to build more houses, is the industry fearful that new regulations, new laws, as and when they take effect and get introduced, will make the industry prohibitively expensive or tricky to get the necessary buildings and houses built? Or is there a sort of sense of understanding that this new wave of regulation will be needed?
Well, the industry broadly welcomed the report. Obviously, it is a very long report, nearly 1,700 pages long. So a lot of the reaction that we've had so far from the industry has sort of been in the line of, well, we need to digest the report fully before we can properly comment on its recommendations. But having said that, if there's more regulation, then that could always increase costs. If there's a restriction in the amount of building products which project teams can use when building a scheme, then that does have the potential to increase costs. It's worth noting that the Grenfell Tower refurbishment used those cladding and insulation products because they were cheaper. So the client deliberately value engineered that project and chose the ACM and insulation products to drive down costs. So in future projects, if those products are not available, then they could drive up costs. Of course, if there's a benefit of increased building safety, then lots of people say that's no bad thing. There's also the risk that project teams might have to spend more money hiring consultants, fire consultants, building control surveyors. So it does have a risk to drive up costs in projects. But I think, as is always the case with construction, the most important thing is certainty. And it has been quite an uncertain regulatory environment over the past few years since Grenfell. So, if there's going to be greater certainty around what the regulations are, then that will always be a good thing.
Tom Lowe, thanks so much for joining us, senior reporter at both Building Design and at Building.